We chose this topic because we're all pressed for time right now, and looking at data at about the middle of the year is a great way to continue to monitor your progress and consider what's next. We believe that protocols really do benefit bringing groups together, providing equity of voice, creating conditions for collaborative space where deep conversations can happen. And as data's changed so much in the past year, we want to highlight some data that you can use in your practice right now. In case you didn't know, OSPI has a YouTube channel where we post all of our recordings, and we have a playlist just for the Gate Equity webinars. So you can subscribe by clicking on the bell. We highly encourage you to subscribe. You always get our latest videos. Anytime that Chris Regdahl is addressing the state, you get that right away. This webinar is brought to you through the Office of System and School Improvement within the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. At OSPI, we believe each student needs to be prepared for post-secondary pathways, careers, and civic engagement. We're driven to transform K-12 education to a system that's centered on closing opportunity gaps and is characterized by high expectations for all students and educators. We believe we'll achieve this by developing equity-based policies and supports that empower educators, families, and communities. And we aspire to have all of our work be driven by our values, ensuring equity, collaboration, and service, achieving excellence through continuous improvement, and focusing on the whole child. The Gate Equity webinar was created with the purpose of highlighting practices that increase access to education and ultimately to graduation. Through our webinars, we're striving to go beyond equality to think about the opportunities we have to examine and dismantle current policies and practices that result in disparate outcomes for our students, with the ultimate goal of ensuring that each student has access to the instruction and support that will make them successful in school and in life. We want to acknowledge historical context and engage our students, families, and communities as partners in decision-making because they possess the strengths and cultural knowledge that will transform our schools. I'm eternally grateful for the beauty and tranquility of our state. I live in Olympia, Washington, and I'm broadcasting from the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island, Coast Salish, Cowlitz, and Nisqually. We acknowledge the tribe's commitment to the resurgence of their traditional ways and the respect and protection of all people, not only those who are living, but also those who have gone before and who are yet to be born. We pay our respect to the elders, both past and present, and to the valued resource the tribe has defined as their children. They are the tribe's future. We ask that the participants in this meeting also honor the tribal lands on which each of you are located today. And if you're not sure, getting in contact with your local tribe is a great place to start. In this webinar, we seek to honor the people and lands of Native to America, and we also want to acknowledge the pain and trauma resulting from over 400 years of racism in the United States and against people of the African diaspora. We stand with our communities of color during these unprecedented times of civil unrest, especially those who identify as and or are categorized as Black and or African American. We'll continue to center our work in leading with racial equity. We want to offer a moment of silence and afterwards honor the space for people from communities of color to respond to this acknowledgement first. And then we invite allies and others to communicate their comments after. We invite accountability and partnership. We're going to pause now to reflect. Thank you for participating. We are now going to open the floor for our listeners from communities of color to respond to this acknowledgement first. All right, do feel free to continue to put your thoughts in. If you have resources that you'd like to share, we would love to share those out with everybody else. For myself, I'd like to say every time I give this acknowledgement, I feel nervous, and that silence is hard for me, but I think it's really important that we do this acknowledgement, and I'm challenged every day by our responsibility to each student. I'm glad that we can start our webinars with this statement at the forefront of our minds, just so that we are centered on the idea that we're here to serve students. Today, we have several objectives. We're going to explore data review protocols. We are going to apply data review with a PDSA framework. We're going to practice identifying root cause and problem of practice with the essential question, is each student getting what they need to succeed? And we'll, of course, have tools and resources. And I have with me today, I'm so excited to bring them to you, Travis Wentworth, our project manager over at the Office of System and School Improvement here at OSPI. And I also have Ron Franklin, and he is one of our continuous improvement partners who coaches partners with the schools that are identified for improvement in the state of Washington. And Ron has been working on this for a while now, and he is a really, really great resource for you. Travis, I think we're going to go to you.
Awesome. I was just going over the results a bit here, and just thank you all for coming. My name is Travis Wentworth, and I go by he, him pronouns. I'm calling to you from the traditional lands of the Squaxin Island tribe, and just blessings in being here. Thank you. One thing about me is I speak fluent bedtime story. It's a kind of a natural consequence of having a 5-year-old. I actually can't see. Office is over here. 5-year-old bedroom is over there with Legos and such. And Mario downstairs. But with this, one of our favorite stories is The Emperor's New Clothes. And I found this particularly applicable to the way we look at data. And if you're familiar with this story by Hans Christian Andersen, it involves this emperor who is fascinated with clothing and wardrobe. And con artists show up to the empire to create this invisible cloth, this invisible fabric that you will only be able to see if you are intelligent. You wouldn't be able to see if you are incompetent or unintelligent. And so as the story goes, neither the emperor nor the wisest members of the kingdom nor the advisors want to admit that the emperor is actually wearing no clothes at all. And it isn't until the children point and laugh and say, "Hey, why is the emperor wearing nothing but underwear?" do they realize that they had been conned. And as I apply this to the way we look at data, there's that fear. Data is that 4-letter ugly word. Sometimes it's math, sometimes it's numbers. There's many reasons why there's this hesitation to engage with it. And that's where questions are really going to inform how we look at data. And I want to talk a little bit more about that. A much longer version of this story. I'm trying to keep it short to keep me on time. So starting with questions, a key concept here is data inquiry, which our working definition of that is a process for data-informed decision-making that centers on developing a deeper understanding by utilizing a repetition cycle of questioning, analyzing, measuring, and evaluating. So we're going to continually ask questions. We're going to continue to dive deeper into data in order to seek new understanding. Let's think about this in context of data. In order to really look at data, we have to be willing to challenge our beliefs, challenge our understanding of the system, and learn something new. This really requires that we foster a culture of learning. Looking at data is a commitment to learning something new. And if we're not ready to learn something new, we're not ready to look at data. What is the purpose of looking at data if we're not here to learn something new? And data is all about answering questions. So we have to ask those questions. Similar to in the classroom, we may say, "Oh, please ask your question because your question may benefit others in the room." We as adults tend to forget that. We have that question that others would benefit from as well. So there's no wrong observation. There's no wrong question when we engage in this work. And it's not about what we know. It's about what we want to learn and discover through data. With that, I want to invite Ron to share in.
Well, good morning. My name is Ron Franklin, and I'm honored to be coming to you today from the traditional lands of the Cowlitz tribe. As a continuous improvement partner, our work is all about coming alongside, leaning into, and honoring your work. I have the privilege of supporting districts and schools as they create cultures where students thrive. The SIP work is summarized best in these words: relationship building, listening, observing and questioning, and giving feedback. As I thought about this presentation, I was intent on being real and authentic, and this came to me. So let's get real with data. Let's recognize that the district's mission, vision, commitments, and goals really do drive this work. That we'll have the opportunity to engage stakeholders in invitational data inquiry, that will accept the fact that growth requires change, and will learn together through a collaborative process. So we begin by really honoring the work of the districts and schools that we have the opportunity to work in. A lot of work has been done identifying mission, vision, values, and goals. And in this slide, you see the key questions that mission, vision, values, and goals answer. As we look at these questions, we can see that it is so important to take a look at each aspect and segment as we go through this. And as I look at the particular segment around vision, another question that I like to ask is, what do you want to create? And when I think of values, it's one thing to express a belief that all students can learn. It's quite another to commit to actions that assure all students get the support they need to learn. According to John Gordon, you create a culture of greatness by expecting great things to happen, even during challenging times. These have been the most challenging of times. And I've had the opportunity to connect with leaders in the districts that you see on the next screen. As you look at this screen, you can see key words really that I've taken out of their information and their websites and the things that they're doing, their work. And really you can see that engage, educate, empower, equity, excellence, community, creating promising futures, all these key words where these leaders are really acting on their core values as they go about their core business, working hard to create culturally inclusive environments. One such leader is Brooke Brown in the Franklin Pierce School District. You can see what others have said about her and what she says about herself. Others have said she uses her classroom to create a brave, inclusive environment that allows students to show up authentically, centering their experiences and cultivating their understanding of their identity to develop empathy and compassion for others. And Brooke says, everything is diverse on my walls. I want to make sure that when my students come in, that they can see themselves represented on the walls of my classroom. Brooke was named the 2021 Washington State Teacher of the Year. And really what she has created is exactly what Tyrone Howard and other contributors have described in All Students Must Thrive when they speak of designing culturally responsive learning experiences. So the question that I have for you is, what do you want to create? And what are the underpinnings for a culture of inclusion in your setting? Travis, you want to guide us through this?
Sure. So all of our discussion prompts today will be through this Padlet. We have our first two questions from the PowerPoint. What do you want to create? And what are the underpinnings for a culture of inclusion in your setting? Alrighty, I just wanted to refresh my screen and just share a few of the things we're seeing. We want to, in the column, what do we want to create? Student engagement, positive and safe learning environments, equity, positive relationships with students and families and staff, learning environment. Actually, there's a rich, I can already see by this scroll bar, many posts, and I just want to thank you all for this. Just share a couple examples from what are the underpinnings for a culture of inclusion in your setting: relationships, connections, spaces for voice, atmosphere, welcoming, a new anti-racist advisory committee that is building strength and capacity, belief that all of us are special and unique and worthy of. And I'm sure when I refresh, it'll fill in the rest of that statement. Thank you all for sharing.
As we focus on continuous improvement, principles of improvement science come into play. This particular graphic, on the left, you see the key principles of improvement science identified. And on the right, some questions that really allow us to focus on these principles in these times of COVID-19. And quite frankly, it's essential that we consider these questions. So as we think about improvement science being problem-focused and user-centered, and then the question, well, what can we learn from the changes we are making about what students are learning and how? And the connection, the question specifically refers back to the improvement science aspect or quality. Attend to variability, learn through disciplined inquiry, embrace measurement, see the system. And I know from talking to school leaders, this is exactly what's happening right now. And these questions are the kinds of questions that are being considered and are being dealt with. So again, we're going to have a chance to collect some wisdom in the room, so to speak. We want to capture some of your responses to these questions. Travis, you want to handle this again?
Absolutely. So we're going to jump back into Padlet to reflect on one of the questions. There's a lot of questions. If you have time, feel free to explore a second or third, but there's a lot of questions here. Pick one of these questions, starting with what can we learn from the changes we are making about what students are learning and how, through this question, can we use this as an opportunity to better connect initiatives across our system? So any one of those questions, pick one. Alrighty. So what we'd like to invite you to do, if we only have time for a couple of share outs.
Hi, my name is Heather Craggs. I'm on the Tulalip tribes. We took the question around families and, getting feedback from them. And the thing that we've really been navigating is how do we really measure or define student engagement? We need to think about it through multiple lenses because of unique situations. And when I think about, like, even in this meeting, not all of us have our video on, but we're actively engaged, or maybe some of us had to step away for a minute because of life. And so I really think about how can we have systems in place to effectively measure that student engagement during this remote setting.
Thank you very much, Heather. Ron, any comments?
In answering these questions and collecting answers to these questions, even if this Padlet is just full of these tremendous responses, that's data that can be utilized and examined. In fact, we want to honor those that are giving us that feedback, and they want to be heard. So we want to have the opportunity to look at that along with other data. And one of the things that helps us do that is this whole utilization of protocols. So why do we use protocols? And you can see that there are many reasons. I love the verbs on the left. Create, hear, seek, identify, allow, give, share. I know Kefi mentioned some things earlier. We all know the frustration of a meeting that just goes flat because we didn't have a way of organizing. But we know that the beauty of protocols is to encourage dialogue. And we know that hopefully we have the voices at the table that need to be there, and we have a chance to hear those voices. As we're looking at data, it then is really important that we consider equity.
And before we move on, Ron, I just wanted to add to that as well and just say that, the protocol has to meet your environment and situation. And one protocol may serve one of these action items, but when you combine two together, sometimes you have that complement of now we can save time and hear every voice at the same time, remembering that you still have the freedom to maybe use the protocol based on the rules provided at first, but customize it to your environment and make it work for you. Let's go ahead and move on to equity considerations.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And this particular slide, it indicates some equity considerations we certainly want to have as we're looking at our data. Looking at equity gaps. What about trend data? What's that showing in terms of evidence of progress? What about unintended and negative consequences that may be surfacing? And in the end, when we do make these equity considerations, we want to make sure that we are identifying the inequities and seeing the entire system. Hopefully we can shift mindsets, and the key is to amplify the voice of each stakeholder who's experiencing the system.
And just adding to what Ron said and sharing a bit about equity of voice, when we have a dialogue, when we look at data, when we set goals or even define our vision for the future, we look at that through our values, our identity, our perspectives, and our voice. We look at it with our own curiosities and our own priorities, and all of these things filter in or funnel into our bias. And bias is often referred to as a negative thing, but really it's this natural occurrence. Bias is that subconscious part of our brain that remembers how to walk so we don't have to consciously think about it, remembers how to do things naturally or unconsciously so we can do more things. So it's a very natural occurrence, but we always have to keep it in check because that same bias informs how we look at data, what data we choose to look at, what questions we choose to ask, and how can we include more perspectives, more values that represent more identities, more curiosities when we look at data. This is where inclusion starts. It starts with looking at the data or having a conversation. Who are we inviting to that table? So I wanted to offer a couple of protocols, and as I mentioned before, pairing them together strengthens the protocol. So the first is the 1, 2, 4. And just a quick reflection question would be, have you ever been in a meeting where there's been this rich dialogue and you didn't get a chance to say a single word? You wanted to add in, but you just didn't get the opportunity. And I will say it doesn't matter if you're 1,500 people or 4 people, this can still occur. So what 1, 2, 4 means is 1 represents that individual reflection. Okay, we're about to have a dialogue. Let's pause and let's take 5 minutes, write down if that's a strategy that works for you, but just let's reflect on this conversation before we have it. And this really helps the introvert or extrovert or even culturally informed communication styles, right? Now let's consider pair share represents the 2. If you're doing a pair share, you're sharing the floor with one other person. If you're taking turns, there's a high chance that you have an opportunity to talk at least once during the meeting. If every meeting you get a chance to at least say one thing to one person, what does that do to your engagement? And this applies not only to the adults who are changing the system, but the students as well. Can the students talk to just one other person? And then 4, it doesn't have to be 4 people, but 4 represents that smaller group. We keep scaling up. We start individual, we go to pair, and then we go to that small group before we share out. And this, I would say, changes the most because maybe we only have 4 people. Okay, we have 4 people in a meeting, let's individually reflect, then let's pair share, and then let's share out. Or we have 20 people, but not enough time. So we're gonna do individual reflection, pair share, and then we share out. That part, I would say, customizes the most, but the more you can slowly increase your population of engagement, the richer or more effective use of time there's going to be. One other thing is if you're in that group share out, you ever hear the first group shares all the ideas and all the groups after they're like, oh yeah, ditto, they said everything. Adding in this component of one idea share really engages all of those groups and prevents us from checking out. Once the first group has shared all the ideas, there's no point in listening anymore. So the one idea share is one group shares one thing that they talked about and you rotate through every group until you have all the ideas. This increases time, reduces redundancy of groups repeating the same message, and allows everyone to more actively engage. Ron, anything to add here?
I just appreciate people sharing in the chat even as you're talking. That freedom to make a comment and add an insight is so valuable. Thank you.
Akiva, I'm seeing your message in the chat. I like that you've added back in that culture of learning because you're right. We do have to be willing to learn something new before we can engage in that listening wholeheartedly. And what is listening? That's another topic as well. Alrighty. In a little bit, we are going to actually practice some data review, and we're going to kind of close with identifying root cause and problem practice. But before we get there, I wanted to be able to define problem of practice. I've seen many definitions going around, and I just like to think about it in reverse. So problems of practice are practices that are problematic. Let me dive in a bit deeper. If we think about one of my favorite quotes is systems are perfectly designed to get the results they get. You've seen many versions of this quote from many people. This one comes from Deming. And what I think about, if a system's perfectly designed to get the results they get, problems of practices are our contributions to that system. They're our practice, the behaviors and actions we are engaging in that create those system results. That's what we're looking for. And a practice here does not just imply what we are doing, it also implies what we are not doing. The other thing I want to challenge even is the word problems, failures. These are challenging words that really incite a lot of emotion. And sometimes it's really about contributing practices. If you want to relabel it, what is the practice that's contributing to the system results? Or what is the opportunity of changing our practice? So if problems are problematic language, consider contributions of practice. So for our data review today, we're going to talk about ninth grade on track data. I want to provide this quick definition, and then I'm actually going to invite Keffy Anderson, our program lead for ninth grade on track and for the GATE webinar series, to add in. So ninth grade on track is the first time ninth graders are considered on track to graduation if they earn all the credits they attempted in ninth grade, meaning they have no course failures. Keffy, would you like to add in?
Yeah, well, and I think the power of ninth grade on track is how it's a formative assessment. It's about, midway through career of a student, and it really sums up all that they've experienced up to that point in the elementary and the middle school, and it gives you a chance in high school to give that student even more support if they need it. So it's a great measure. It's highly predictive of future graduation success. So I highly recommend just taking a look at it and thinking about how your spot in your school contributes to this measure.
Thinking about ninth grade on track data, I know it centers on that high school environment, but how are we all contributing to that score? How is this a score or an indicator of our middle schools, of our elementary schools? And I really want to challenge our thought on ninth grade on track as being a system indicator for all of our schools contributing to that. Alrighty, I'm going to hand it over to Ron.
So what's the big deal about ninth graders being on track? And I love this data that's actually displayed on our website, OSPI and Keffy. It really captured kind of the why and what the big deal is here. Quite frankly, it's even more magnified by the challenge of COVID-19. What to do to ameliorate the problem of a ninth grader not being on track? Had the opportunity to read The Power of Habit. Perhaps some of you have too. But in The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg states, some habits have the power to start a chain reaction, changing other habits as they move through an organization. Some habits, in other words, matter more than others in remaking businesses and lives. These are keystone habits, and they can influence how people work, eat, play, live, spend, and communicate. Keystone habits start a process that over time transforms everything. With that in mind, I present to you that collaborative inquiry and utilizing collaborative inquiry, and in this case, we have a very specific protocol, the collaborative learning cycle, can become a keystone habit. And a habit that is so powerful in your work that, quite frankly, you can't do your work without it. We're going to have the opportunity to utilize this collaborative learning cycle as we take a look at some very specific data around ninth grade on track. And as you look at the cycle in terms of activating and engaging, exploring and discovering, organizing and integrating, and looking at the key questions that really we are considering at each phase of this learning cycle, what assumptions are we entering with? What about patterns and trends and things, categories we're seeing, and we actually get into our explore and discover? And in organizing and integrating not only inferences and explanations, but what about causation? And when we think about causation, we think about root cause and we think about causal categories. And the very, very important aspect of looking at the causal categories and identifying perhaps a root cause that might come from a specific module category. So what we want to do is take a look at our state report card. We want to use this protocol to examine some Washington State ninth grade on-track data. And Travis, I'd like you to take us through this.
You got it. We're going to navigate a few different tools at once. We will be using the Padlet tool to engage in or record our process through the dialogue. And meanwhile, I will be live going through the state report card. And we'll engage in the keystone habit that Ron had shared, beginning with predictions and assumptions. This activity really helps. Again, we want to challenge what we know or think we know. And when we make those predictions, we are making statements that are reflective of what we think we know about our system. And the assumptions then are, why do we think that? So we'll start there, we'll get into observations, and then we'll, after this walkthrough of the data, we're at these last few prompts now, where we're gonna first take a look at ninth grade on track predictions and assumptions. Now, before I go to the data, this is actually the first activity that we wanna engage in before we look at that data. So if I were to ask you right now, to record here in the Padlet individually, when we see ninth grade on track, disaggregated or broken down by race, ethnicity, and gender identity, what do you expect to see? So I predict that we will see these gaps in our race, ethnicity groups. That's an example, but certainly make any prediction that's reflective of what you believe you're going to see. After you make that prediction, add to that in the same chat, why do you think that's the case? Why do you think you're going to see that? We will be using the most current data available right now on the report card. So it's going to be the 2019 school year. And after we look at the initial data, we will look at trend data. So we will see multiple years of data. I believe it goes back to 2015, but we'll verify that. So again, you're in the Padlet and you're making your predictions. What do you expect to see based on race, ethnicity, and gender identity? The nice thing about this activity is it's a soft way of entering into the data. Instead of starting with the display, we're really just testing what we know or think we know about the data before we see it. And when I say the word test, it means we get to test our assumption. Were we right in our predictions? Why? Were our reasons why we believe that the data is going to look the way it is, were those accurate? And we can have a conversation about that. Alrighty, I want to go ahead and share the first display, and I want to show how I got here. So I'm on the state report card, and there's two options here to navigate a specific school or district's data. We're going to look at the Washington State as a whole, and that way when we're engaging in our conversations, we're all looking at the same data. So I'm going to see this for Washington State. So now when we click on Washington State, we land on the report card where we can scroll down and see a lot of displays. What I want to do before I go scroll down though is switch from the report card to the diversity report. We're going to use the diversity report for our conversation today. Again, we're focusing on ninth grade on track, and that's included within the other student measures. We also call them the school quality and student success indicators, which include regular attendance, dual credit, and ninth grade on track. So let me go ahead and open up student demographics. And here's the first display we're going to look at. Again, this is the 2019 school year data. And here it's broken down by gender identity and race ethnicity. And I want you to make some observations, at least one. What do you see? And then you'll have an opportunity to record that in the Padlet. I'm going to leave this display just for a moment to show the Padlet again. So here's where we're entering our predictions and assumptions. And I see some in there already, which is great. And then over here we have, now we're naming our ninth grade on track observations, patterns, trends. What do you see? And Marilee's asking about the number of students in each group. So actually I can hover over these indicators to see the n size. And we're just practicing the activity for now. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead and navigate to the next display. Before I do, we'll have a chance to engage in our predictions and assumptions. So we're going to see a very similar data display, only now we're going to see it by student program and characteristic. So this includes students with disabilities, English language learners, low income, migrant, homeless, Section 504, and military parent. What do you predict you will see for student program and characteristics? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and reveal that data. And now, what do you see? Again, observations. With observations, this I think is the trickiest discipline to engage in. It's really about sticking with the facts only what we see, factual statements. It's very easy to say, try to get into causation or why we believe the data is the way it is. And the more we can stick with facts, the more we can try to monitor our bias. Also, again, the data we choose to prioritize, the data we choose to see can also be informed by bias. So it is very much dependent on who do we invite to the table? Would students and families see the same thing? Would they make the same predictions? So I'm going back to the 9th graders on track by student demographics. And I'm glad that we get to repeat this process 3 times. We've seen this data. And in a moment, I'm going to click on trend. And so you can imagine what you're going to see. You're going to see multiple years of data around each one of these student groups. So my question now is, what do you predict you will see when I click on trend? And why do you think that? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and click on trend now. We have our legend at the top. I will note that Gender X, we only started collecting more recently, so we only have 2019 data. Let me show the years. So it looks like I was right. We have the 2015 school year through the 2019 school year. What are your observations? What do you see? Whenever I look at trend data, a fun activity or question to add when you're looking at it, what do you predict the 2020 data is going to look like? And what we're going to talk about now are inferences. So once we've engaged in those predictions of what we think we're going to see, and then we get to see those observations and really challenge, were we right in our predictions? Were we right in our assumptions? And just because we're right in our predictions does not mean our assumptions are right. That's where we have to have that conversation. I'll say that's the opportunity to lean into that uncomfortable space and have those equity or even racial justice-based conversations. And I would be prepared for that. We're going to start talking about inferences, and a nice question to start that conversation is why? Why do we think this is happening? So pick on observations. You may have many of them. What was one of your predictions and one of your observations? And identify an observation that as a group you can answer why. Why do we think this is happening? That's this last chat, 9th grade on track, inferences, explanations, conclusions, and causations. Ask why. I want to wrap us up. And just starting with, we did the predictions, assumptions, we started to make our observations, and now we started to ask ourselves why. And in the data inquiry guide really has informed or is where a lot of these protocols are based on. We've called it pursuing root cause analysis because it is a pursuit. We don't always know what that root cause is right away. We have to try it out, see if it fits. Describing the fishbone for a second here, we've identified our problem statement on the right. And this really connects back to our goals. And our goals are informed by our vision and what we want to create. So if what we want to create requires that we increase 9th grade on track, the question we are now addressing is how do we get each 9th grader on track? And we tend to focus on one of those observations. I think the flat line there in the trend data is a great example of how do we close those gaps. As we have our inference conversation, we identify our first why. We've applied the 6 causal categories from the Wellman and Lipton book, Data-Driven Dialogue. And these are not the only causal categories. In your conversation, you may find additional alternative causal categories, but we offer these as starting places. And we insert our first why that we identify in our conversation. Why is this happening? And after we ask that why, we ask why again. And, I recommend at least 3 times, but we don't stop asking why until we feel confident that we've identified a root cause that we can test out. So you'll see our first item here, and we'll keep asking why and drilling down deeper. We tend to want data to answer the why for us, and it's not that simple. We have to have that dialogue and try something out. When we have a root cause that we're pursuing, we then insert support. So we try to address that root cause, hoping for that chain reaction that alters our current reality, changes our system, and gets different results. If it's not getting different results, we have to come back here and identify a different root cause that we're going to pursue.
We may need more data. And as we examine a particular why and getting to that root cause. And so it's just going to go deeper based upon doing this process.
And thank you, Ron. When we identify these whys, sometimes we identify a lot of things that does not have to do with our practice, are things that are not within our control. And you'll see some that are. So 2 challenges I would provide. 1, can we center our why based on our contributions to the system? What are we doing or not doing? And second, when we see those causal factors or those whys that we identify that are related to something not in our control, can we spin that? Okay, this is happening. What can we do to support this? And Ron?
Thank you. Well, we definitely want to take positive action to address our prioritized area of concern and problem of practice. We're looking for positive outcomes. We certainly don't want to stay stuck in the why. We want to get on with a particular positive action going forward. Again, what is a high-level outcome we're working towards? Strategies that we're going to use to drive those outcomes. And then there's just implementing that theory of action, and then leading on to a cycle of inquiry process with the Plan, Do, Study, Act, and with ACT being at the point where we have to identify what do we want to adjust, abandon, adopt.
This is us trying to apply our data review protocols to support PDSA, because we don't want to overwhelm with all these additional frameworks. It should support the frameworks we're already using. And plan, the purpose of why we look at data changes based on which stage we're in. And plan, this is when we're trying to create that action plan by identifying what root cause or problem of practice we're going to address. Let's address that in our action plan. That's really the initial part of the inquiry, is getting to that action plan. In Do, we review data again, only in this case, our outcome is different. Instead, we're reviewing data to just monitor the implementation of our action plan. Are we doing the things we said we were going to do? Are they having the desired impact? Yes or no? Do we have to make adjustments? And sometimes monitoring data is just being aware of our environment and its extenuating circumstances. If you want more on monitoring progress, the October GATE webinar focusing on effectively monitoring progress is a good one. Study is another example where we're reviewing data, only here it's about lessons learned. What did we learn based on what we implemented? To get to ACT, which, as Ron said, this is simply making a decision based on the data we reviewed in study. Are we going to adopt this change, abandon it, or adjust it?
So the bottom line in our effort to get real is our effort to get real with data, resulting in each student getting what is needed to thrive. We had a chance to begin today with really, what do we want to create? And I couldn't help but think of what I've read in the Highlight Public Schools website and their information. And I just thought in terms of what they want to create is captured in their promise. And it reads, our promise, every student in Highline Public Schools is known by name, strength, and need, and graduates prepared for the future they choose. Wow. If we can all do that, we're on our way.
Thank you, Ron. And thanks, Travis. We really appreciate all of our audience members. We have a couple of resources to share.
So we've got one link on unlocking federal and state program funds to support student success. The October webinar that I referenced earlier on effectively monitoring progress, there's a link to that. This afternoon, we'll be talking about native voices and data. So I'm really excited about that. And on the website, we have the OSPI, on the OSPI Data and Implementation site. If you are familiar with the OSPI Data Toolkit, it's a 320-page document with a bunch of protocols. We've just released an updated iteration. You have access to both, but it's a 53-page version that's supposed to be modeled of what can we complete within a school year. The protocols we engaged today with predicting, assumptions, observations, and getting to root cause are included within that guide. There's a link to the report card, and certainly if you want some additional support or have questions, the link at the bottom will lead you to us and our team.
Thank you, Travis. We're also a good resource, so you can contact me or Travis or Ron through our email addresses on the Gate Equity webinar page if you're ever looking for our past shows, or you can catch the videos, the recordings of them on our YouTube channel. Next month, we're going to be looking at relationships. So we've got some teams working with us. Teamwork makes the dream work. Maximizing roles and relationships to serve students is going to be happening. And in the afternoon, we're going to be looking at building hope through social emotional learning and motivational interviewing. And this afternoon at 3 o'clock, we are honored to host Elise Washines from the Yakama Nation. She's going to be chatting with us about native voices and data. And so you should come back and checking her out too. She's an awesome speaker and has so much knowledge to share with us. Thank you so much for joining us on this awesome Wednesday morning. We appreciate our audience always. If you have questions, please contact us. Have a great day.